think the fact that they had not met, the desire was on both sides to restore, in a sense, the summit at the first available opportunity. It's a good sign. Also remember that Russia is the president of BRICS, and the BRICS summit is likely to take place in October or November. Again, there is an invitation for India to go. So it is possible he may go again to Russia, but this time for the BRICS summit. But I think it's a good statement to say that we are still committed to our relationship with Russia. We value it and we see benefit in the relationship. Also remember that we have good ties with Russia. Our leaders have been talking on phone, exchanging visits, otherwise EM had gone. And if the visit can lead to a conversation between our PM and President Putin, which might lead to, say, a reduction in tensions or a greater willingness on the part of President Putin to talk to the West or to lower tensions on Ukraine and de-escalate, that will be a good thing. That will be a big contribution which India can make. So today you need people and leaders and countries in the world who can actually talk to both sides and try and help in de-escalation and movement towards dialogue, diplomacy, away from the battlefield. What happens in every summit is that they review what decisions they have taken in the past, and they also plan ahead. Now, because of the changed circumstances, new areas of cooperation have emerged. So, I think they will probably take stock of that, let us say energy, oil, gas, and look at new areas of cooperation, which could go beyond the traditional military and defense. So, it is possible they may spend some time looking at what are the other areas, whether it is science and technology, space, nuclear energy, even things like food security, infrastructure, and maybe in the field of energy itself, look at even more ambitious plans. So, I would say overall a review of how to go forward on the bilateral side. I think we are doing a good job so far of managing our relations with all sides, with all countries. I mean, this is a situation where we are simply bystanders. The growth of tension between these two camps has taken place over the last 10 years, since 2014. It has been brewing, finally leading to the outbreak of a full kind of invasion or a war. We have kept channels open with all sides. We actually do not want the world to be divided again, like it was in the 50s and 60s. And the way we think is the way the majority of the world is thinking. Whether you look at Africa, you look at West Asia, you look at Latin America, we are not alone. The vast majority of the global south countries or the developing countries are not keen to get into yet another version of the Cold War or the division of the world down the middle. And what they are saying is, look, there are far more important issues at stake for the majority of the world, which relate to development, employment, jobs, climate change. These are the issues of critical importance, and we have to focus on that. Today, what has happened is that the UN Security Council, the 5 members, they are at loggerheads with each other. So, the Security Council, the permanent 5, they are paralyzed. So, who is there today to safeguard international peace and security? So, what I think today Indian voice is more important than it ever was. We are not taking sides. The only side we are taking is the side of peace and saying, listen, we don't want to go back to the past. We've come back, we've come out of the past with a lot of bloodshed and war. We don't want to go back. So, you both must, and all parties, please get back to the, there are other conflicts. Ukraine is not the only conflict in the world. There are thousands dying in other parts of the world, in other conflicts, which are not getting the kind of attention that they deserve and they need. And there are no ready solutions in sight. So, the longer this continues, the worse it gets for us. I don't see a drift in the sense of that the relationship, that India is losing interest in the relationship. India still maintains that Russia is an important partner for the relationship, and this visit is intended to convey a signal to Russia, to India, to the rest of the world that in fact there is no drift, that we are going forward. The reason why some people may talk of the drift is because of the impact of sanctions on our normal day-to-day trade and economic cooperation, where Indian companies are finding it difficult or are hesitant to deal with Russian companies because of fear of secondary sanctions. So, it is possible that, but historically the trade and economic relationship with Russia has always remained much lower than, say, even with China or with the West. So, it is nothing new. In fact, the challenge actually is how to increase the level of economic cooperation. Politically, I think we have been in regular contact with Russia on all issues. So, on the US, clearly, I mean, the relationship has moved fast and in many directions. So, today the India-US relationship is definitely much closer and more substantive than it has been in the past. Now, the question arises, you see, even when, after all, President Putin became president 24 years ago, in his first few years, India enjoyed relations both with the US and with Russia, and the Americans never really had a serious problem of our relations with Russia. It is only now that they have become more, let us say, sensitive and concerned. So, we have been explaining to the Americans, as far as I know, that our relationship with Russia does not mean that we accept or support Russia's actions in the war, but it simply means that we need Russia for various other purposes which are relevant for our own national priorities, whether it is development, whether it is energy, whether it is trade or anything else. Let us see how the Americans react, but I hope they see the visit in the right spirit, as I said, of a friend of the West visiting Moscow and talking to the president of Russia, and maybe discussing with him the need to go back to the dialogue process and the negotiating table, away from the war. So, we are doing everything with Russia with full transparency. There is no hidden agenda or any strategic surprises as far as the West is concerned. They are fully aware of what we are doing with Russia, and there is no intention, I think, on the Indian side to do anything to damage or hurt the interests of the West or of Ukraine. In fact, to the contrary, I mean, when PM said this is not an era of war, and India has repeatedly said the only way is dialogue and diplomacy. This visit is dialogue, this visit is diplomacy. So, you need to actually engage because stopping conversation is not going to help. So, I hope that it is seen in a correct light. Well, I think yes, I mean, if you break it down, I think the political and security pillar is one big obvious pillar that included then you have the military cooperation, it was a major pillar. Then you have science and technology, and then you have trade, economic cooperation, and then you have culture, people to people, tourism, and I would say the last pillar may be connectivity. These are the broad pillars under which the relationship falls. So, on the political and security, for example, the Russian position on Kashmir, on Pakistan, on terrorism in the Security Council. On military, of course, we have cooperation which is now many decades old And then on trade and economy, as you know, that includes energy, I would say, all our oil imports, energy imports, investments in the energy sector. And when it comes to culture, people to people tourism, it's actually a really important area, because the common man's perception about India in Russia is very positive. And similarly in India, there is a lot of goodwill for Russia. So at the popular level, there's a lot of goodwill. They are very familiar and very enthusiastic about Indian culture. And I've seen it with my own eyes, whether it's yoga or dance or music, spirituality. There's a huge amount of interest and sympathy for it. So we shouldn't forget that aspect. And similarly, tourism, now we've eased up on the visas, but the potential is huge for tourism both ways. And lastly, of course, I would say connectivity. There are 2-3 proposals which are going on. We need to speed them up. The North-South Transport Corridor, the Chennai-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor, and then you of course have the Russian Far East. I mean, I keep saying this, there is one province, one republic or state in the Russian Far East, which is the size of India, just one province. And that province, the population is 1 million people. So it's like 1 million people staying in a landmass the size of India. So we are talking of a big country, the largest country on the planet. No Indian government can afford to write off Russia or to ignore Russia, because Russia straddles Europe, West Asia, Central Asia, the Far East, and it's critical for us to keep Russia engaged and work with Russia. We don't have a common border with Russia. We don't have a boundary. We don't have any border dispute. So, there is a lot of reason why we should continue to maintain the relationship, in the hope that our relationship moderates and helps to moderate Russia's positions. Similarly, we keep in touch with the West in the hope that the tensions between the West and Russia can be reduced through some voices of sanity. In fact, in the Swiss so-called peace summit a few weeks ago, there were at least 10 or 15 countries from the South which attended but refused to sign the communique. And these are all major countries: South Africa, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, India, Chile, Argentina. All of them did not join in the condemnation of Russia or in endorsing this communique, because the view was that Russia must be a part of the process. You cannot have a peace summit without Russia. So it's interesting that the biggest countries from the South share the same view that we do. We can talk a lot about the Russia-China relationship, but Russia is Russia, right? They are an old empire, very proud people. Of course, their economy is not doing well. They have shrunk their influence globally. But they are a proud country, civilization. They are not going to allow themselves to be subsumed by China. Today, of course, they have been pushed to China and they have no option. But in the medium term, they want to keep their options open in Asia, and they cannot afford to lose India. They simply cannot afford to, because in the long term and the medium term, India can be extremely useful for Russia. And so it's working on both sides. Both have an interest in maintaining relations. In certain areas, it is a cause of concern, because we want Russia to maintain its own independent position as far as India is concerned. China is an adversary of India. Russia is not. But China will utilize maybe Russia's vulnerability today to try and persuade Russia to take some actions or adopt some policies which may not be good for India. That's a risk we run. But the question is, in the realistic, in a sense, whether this will happen and to what extent it will happen. Let us assume that Russia accepts Chinese positions on, say, its relations with India or Russia's relations with India. Then obviously that will be a moment where we will have to sit down and take stock of our relations with Russia. But we haven't reached there yet. But all the time we have to keep in touch, in dialogue with Russia, so that they know what we think about the India-Russia relationship and the India-China relationship. Militarily, in terms of technology, we have to be closely watching what is the nature of the Russia-China, let us say, technological partnership, particularly when it comes to the military and defense. So yes, that is a area of for us to watch. Just as, for example, we used to watch the US-Pakistan military relationship. When the Americans were giving F-16s and arming Pakistan to the teeth, we used to raise it with the Americans that why are you doing this? Because if you do this, you are going to damage the India-US relationship. So if we are going in that direction between Russia and China, I am absolutely sure we will raise it with the Russians. But the question of whether you have reached that stage. And one way to kind of temper and moderate this trend is to keep up your conversations with the Russians. You can't write them off. You can't, you know, it's difficult to make a blanket statement about yes or no. But I would be very surprised if Russia were to help China in any area which affects our core interests. I would be very surprised. I don't think the Russian establishment or the Kremlin will go down that path, because they will know the consequences of it, and it's a judgment issue. I don't think that will happen. Yeah, he didn't go. I don't know the reasons for it, but he's going to Russia. I mean, he's going to Moscow. So the official reason is because of Parliament. He could not go. But I think, you see, there was this SCO summit, then there is the BRICS summit, and now this bilateral summit with Russia. So it seems that the government has maybe they sat down and decided which ones to attend, which not to attend. And clearly, from a political foreign policy point of view, the bilateral talks with Russia are going to be very important, perhaps more than the SCO. But we'll see. It's, as I said, it's very early days. It's not even been a month in the new government. We have to see how their policies evolve towards China, towards Pakistan. We'll have to wait and see. And I think those two countries are also waiting to see how India, the new government in India, they approach both these countries in this third term. So it's still early days, but if the fundamental problems remain the same, then we can't expect anything new. So if we have to expect anything different from the past, departure from the past or something new, then something has to change. In the case of China, our minister has met the Chinese foreign minister in Astana in Kazakhstan. It's a good sign. It's a good sign. They've talked about narrowing the border problems. So if gradually, progressively, if the Chinese realize what is in their interest and they back off and they make amends for the mistake they made in 2020, then we can look at progressive normalization, returning back to with China. Insofar as Pakistan is concerned, I think the message is clear to them that terrorism is non-negotiable as far as this government is concerned in India, and they just want to make sure, our government today, that they don't do anything in a hurry, that they avoid making mistakes of the past. So they just need some assurance that Pakistan is serious about also changing its ways and its methodology of dealing with India. This process was going on, as you know, at the level of foreign ministers. Every year, the RIC group was meeting. In fact, they used to issue communiques actually on RIs, which is today it sounds quite unbelievable. There was in fact even at some stage a talk of the RIC defense ministers talking to each other, and there were other kinds of conversations. As of now, I don't see it happening, because the trust deficit between India and China is too large. It's in fact broken down. So I don't see that happening, but I know that the Russians are wedded to this idea. In fact, one of the great experts and former Prime Minister Primakov, that was his vision for the Eurasian region, the Russia, India, China. But even though the trilateral may not be something which India will get into today, the fact is that I think in the Indian strategic calculations, the importance of Russia and the importance of China are very much there. Because we belong to this neighborhood, we are part of Eurasia, and you have to deal with both these powers. But in the meanwhile, what has happened is that our relationship with the West has grown also very fast. So we are in a slightly different position today than we were, say, 10 years ago. But I would say that while the RIC group as a whole may not have, I think for the moment it is dormant. But the idea of Russia, India, China is there. But for the moment, the grouping and likely meetings is dormant. I think we first have to fix the bilateral with China, the equation. That is much more important than this trilateral. The bilateral with Russia is okay. We just need to fix the normalization with China before we can think of being more ambitious.